I'm coming in hot before we dive into today's episode because I have a special announcement, something I've been dreaming of creating for the past 7 years. You know how it feels to learn all of this amazing personal growth stuff, but then somehow end up feeling worse because you're not actually doing it? Like your knowledge is actually making you feel guilty instead of empowered. I get it. That's exactly why I created Living Mind Love. Each month, we'll explore one focus area through the lens of neuroscience and spirituality. But here's the magic part. Instead of overwhelming you with changes, we'll break everything down into tiny micro shifts that your brain actually welcomes. So you'll understand the science behind why it works, connect with the spiritual wisdom, and most importantly, actually apply it to your life. The value in this program is worth at least 50 times what I'm going to be giving it to you for, because it is my mission to help as many people as possible transform their lives. You'll also get access to the first ever Mind Love community on School. So if you're ready to stop collecting wisdom and start actually living it, go to mindlove.com/waitlist to join the waitlist, and you'll get instant access to my 10-year vision meditation. So let's get into today's episode. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 157. Today's episode is all about the hidden keys to your unique motivation.
Rather than asking you to think in broad generalities, we challenge you to come up with a specific instance in which you felt engaged, that you were proud of, something that happened in your life where you felt alive maybe in a way that you hadn't felt alive before. By forcing you to think very specifically about instances in your life and consider those moments, suddenly now you're not just inventing a narrative that you want. Instead, you're extrapolating from some concrete, discrete instance in your life, and it makes it far, far more accurate. And you can begin to look at the patterns between each of those stories and consider how your motivations were at play.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
Hi, friends. First of all, if you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you're always updated about new episodes. Plus, you want to know basically the best way to give back to your favorite podcasts? Actually go to the iTunes app and leave a 5-star review. Reviews are scientifically proven to make me love you more. That's just how it is. I love you when you leave me a review. You sit in my heart for days at a time. No, but seriously, they really help the growth of the show. They're probably the number one thing that you can do besides supporting my sponsors or joining the membership. So it's an easy, free way to give back to a podcast you love. And if you do leave me a review, send it to me at MindLoveMelissa on Instagram, and I'll send you a free meditation track. I have to share a review that made me a little teary-eyed from Max and Carla. She says, always on point. I started listening to this podcast about a year ago, and I've never regretted spending time with Melissa. This show is my mind's weekly workout. I'm especially grateful for this podcast today. Just listened to episode 142, and I'm in tears. I've been having such a hard time with the world lately, as I'm sure many are, and this episode is just perfect. I'm not sure how she does it, but Melissa always seems to find exactly the right person to deliver exactly the right message we need to hear. She always asks the questions I would want to ask and gives great personal insight to the topics. It's these little glimmers of hope that keep us pushing towards a better world. Thanks for existing, Melissa. All the love. Well, all the love right back to you. I teared up a little bit when I read this, and I'm so grateful. But now let's talk about motivation. Do you feel like maybe you're just not a motivated person? Maybe you're watching everyone around you succeeding or moving towards their dreams, but there you are, just wasting another day scanning Netflix for shows that you don't even really want to watch. Maybe you've never been very motivated. Or maybe there was a time you felt motivated, back in school or sports or some passion project, but you just can't figure out how to tap into that again. I have put myself in both of those categories before. On one hand, I was really good at school. I was motivated to be the top of my class. But when I got into the real world, I kind of felt like a deflated balloon. I thought maybe I just had more energy as a teenager. Or maybe I did better when the path to success was just already laid out for me. Just show up, turn in work on time, get A's, simple. Most of the jobs I had, I just did what I was told to do, nothing more, nothing less. But then I got my first competitive sales job, working at the University of Phoenix as an enrollment counselor. Yes, somehow an enrollment counselor was a sales job. Well, suddenly I could feel a fire under my belt again. I flung myself into it. I created my own sales script that I felt really confident about. I was warming up cold leads, and pretty quickly I was gaining attention as the hot new sales girl. And by hot, I mean good at my job. Well, and also hot because self-esteem. Well, about 6 months into that job, my fire just burnt out. I didn't care anymore. And yeah, there were other reasons, like the more I learned about the company, the less I believed in the job, and the way that school went down, that was probably my intuition. Well, that job changed my self-beliefs. When I first started, I was like, oh yeah, I am a motivated person. But I lost it so quickly that I started to feel like a fraud, like someone who could put on a show for a little bit, but couldn't sustain it. I started to look back at other patterns in my life and tie them together. Confirmation bias at its finest. For example, I did that same thing in high school. I was a straight A student until the last year when I stopped showing up. But my confirmation bias didn't account for the trauma I had gone through the year before. I did the same thing in college. I started out on the dean's list and then I stopped caring. My confirmation bias didn't account for the death of my father, though. And then at this time, I just couldn't get pumped up about a job. My confirmation bias did not account for the fact that I had not yet found something I was passionate about. So I built all of these beliefs on partial information. And these beliefs were a big reason that I couldn't get motivated at all for years. But I kept trying. I mean, I had to if I wanted to live on my own in West Hollywood and keep drinking those $15 martinis without sleeping with all the bartenders. What I found was, when I felt motivated, I rocked it. When I didn't, you couldn't pay me enough to do the work. Well, a big turning point for me was finding something I was so passionate about. Something that fed my endless curiosity. Stuff I was partially already doing and learning for free, only now I could share it with the world. If you haven't guessed, that's what I'm doing right now. That was my path to mind love. But even in this journey, there have been slumps. I have my tools, things I do to pump myself back up, but sometimes it's harder than others. And I'm sure all of you can relate to this. But do you ever wonder why? Do we all have just limited energy that goes in spurts? Do we not have the right tools? Are some of us inherently lazy? Maybe if our parents didn't let us watch so much TV as kids, we wouldn't have such an affinity to Netflix and chill, right? But what if it's something else? What if motivation is not one size fits all and we just haven't figured out our unique motivation code? Well, that's what we're talking about today. And our guest is Todd Henry, author of Motivation Code, among other brilliant books. He helps people access their brilliance through his speaking, writing, and his company Accidental Creative. Well, his book, Motivation Code, isn't just his own anecdotal findings. He draws on decades of research and interviews with over 100,000 people, and his conclusions have changed what we know about how to motivate ourselves and others. In fact, he found that there are 27 motivational themes, each with its own unique DNA. What's really interesting is all this time, I thought mind love was the path that piqued my motivation because I finally found my passion. But what I learned through this episode is that maybe that's only a piece of the puzzle. This path also feeds 3 of my key motivators perfectly. Things that have been stimulated almost every single time that I felt motivated and successful in my life. So you'll hear about that in the episode. And this is amazing because now I know exactly what to tap into when I really want to get shit done. So 3 key things we will learn are why motivation often feels elusive and unreliable, how to uncover our top motivational themes, and the shadow side of every motivation and how to combat it. But before we dive in, do you wish you could start each day just a little more motivated? Just sign up for the Morning Mind Love for daily inspirational messages right to your inbox. I get messages from people every single day about how the Morning Mind Love is their favorite way to start their day, or that the message that came through is exactly what they needed to hear. It's kind of like your own personal inspiration oracle. Just visit mindlove.com and sign up right there on the homepage. Plus, you'll get some amazing free gifts when you do, like a free guided binaural affirmation meditation designed to rewire your brain to your highest self. And you'll get one of my favorite tools, a booklet of my personal power lists to help you gain clarity and live each day with intention. And it's all completely free. Just go to mindlove.com to sign up. Or if you're out and about, text the word morning to 33777. That's morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Todd Henry to the show.
Thanks, Melissa. It's great to be here.
So to start out, what's your story and what really interested you in uncovering our motivations?
So I wrote this new book, The Motivation Code, by accident. It wasn't something I had planned. I've spent most of my career really being what I like to call an arms dealer for the creative revolution, helping people to go to work and to solve problems and to be creative every day. And so I've written 4 other books, and all of them were really about the creative process and specifically how creative professionals can be effective every day, or how they can lead teams of creative professionals effectively. And then about 4 years ago, a friend of mine, Rod Penner, who was a management consultant for about 20 years. And I knew he had left the firm that he was a part of, but he had been working on something I didn't know what he was working on. But he said, hey, I want you to take an assessment that I've been working on. And I don't know about you, Melissa, but when I hear assessment, my eyes roll to the back of my head. And I start thinking, great, I need another set of letters to attach to my name. But I knew Rod was great. He was brilliant. And I knew that he and this team of other people he'd been working on this assessment with, I knew that they were all really, really highly respected professionals. And so I took the assessment, and frankly, what I discovered completely blew my mind. I saw in front of me, when I received the report, I saw really answers to why I will stay up until 2 a.m. working on certain tasks for multiple days in a row, but something else that you want me to do that'll take me 5 minutes, it might take 3 weeks for me to get around to it, because I procrastinate so much. It showed me why certain areas of conflict exist in my life, maybe with other people, because I discovered that I'm just differently motivated than some other people in my life. And really revealed to me all of the sort of the peaks and the troughs and the areas of deep engagement and areas where I felt disengaged from my life and my work, and just kind of revealed all of that to me in one snapshot. And so I thought, I need to figure out a way to get this out to more people. The only problem was 4 years ago, I had just signed the contract for my 4th book, which was called Herding Tigers. And so I was already in the process of writing a book. So I've kind of been working on this in the background for the last 4 years. And then the timing just worked out so that it just released. So now the Motivation Code is out and available, and we're trying to get this message of what really drives people out into the world in a broader way.
I mean, that really seems like it's divine timing when you consider that I would need a crap ton of motivation to be writing 2 books at one time, right when you uncovered what was really motivating you.
Well, the funny thing is, and people ask me about this all the time, they say, well, you must really love to write. And the funny thing is, I don't enjoy writing. As a matter of fact, I despise writing. It's like one of my least favorite things to do, but I love the outcome of having written, and I love what that work yields on the other side. And so that really gets right to the heart of what I discovered when I took the Motivation Code assessment, because my number 1 motivation is make an impact. And my number 3 is influence behavior. So if you could think of a job that is more perfectly crafted to somebody who wants to make an impact and influence the behavior and like mindset of other people, it's really hard to find anything more perfect than writing books and sort of introducing idea sets into the world for other people. So it's funny because that really unlocked for me too, like, why do I write when I don't like to write? Why do I keep writing books when that's not my favorite activity? Well, it's because I'm motivated by something that transcends the activities. I'm motivated by the outcomes that those activities yield for me. And that really illuminated a lot for me.
So what do we get wrong about motivation? Because I know it's a hot topic for anyone trying to be an entrepreneur, trying to really excel in life. What was it about this code that really clarified something that you didn't know before? Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up or text the word morning to 33777. Let's talk about legacy for a minute. We're all working so hard on personal growth and building better lives and creating something meaningful. But how do we protect everything we're building? Look, I know life insurance isn't the sexiest topic, but it might be one of the most loving things you can do for your family. We kept putting it off. It's funny how things never feel like a priority until you need it, which is the total wrong way to approach life insurance. But now that we have kids, there is no way I'm taking a chance that they won't be taken care of if something happens to me. So suddenly, this was our number one priority. And SelectQuote makes it surprisingly simple. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. What makes them different is just how personal it is. Their licensed agents take the time to understand your specific situation so that they can find you the right coverage. We're talking 15 minutes to get exactly what you need. And I love that they actually reward you for all the self-work you're doing. So if you're in good health, you could get same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam needed. And it's way more affordable than you might think. Coverage up to $1 million could cost as little as $20 per month. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove. What was it about this code that really clarified something that you didn't know before?
So I think there are a couple of things that we misunderstand about motivation. There are a couple of myths, as I call them in the book. One of them is that you're either motivated or you're not. And I think we hear this all the time. And I hear it all the time as somebody who is in the workplace working with teams all the time. I'll hear managers say, well, that person's just not motivated. And I want to say, well, no, they're motivated. It's just that they're not motivated to do the things that you want them to do, right? And you haven't figured out how to pull that motivation out of them. Even procrastination is motivated by something. You're being motivated at all times to do something. You're trying to get motivational energy from some place. And so, that is really a myth that either we're motivated or we're not. What we really mean is I can't figure out how to get my motivational energy from the tasks that I need to do. And so it is completely a myth. The second myth is that all people are generally motivated in the same way. And again, we see this in the marketplace where people think, well, I'll just throw more money at people. I'll just give them a pay raise and that's going to motivate them to do what I want them to do. But the problem is that pay raise is going to mean different things to different people, depending on how they're motivated, depending on what their motivation code is. So for some people, a pay raise is going to signify that their contribution is recognized, and just the recognition of their manager is going to really fill them with the drive they need to do their best work. For other people, that pay raise might signify an invitation to be a part of a high functioning team. And what they really love is being a part of a team with other people. And so that's really what's going to drive them. It's not about the money. It's about the advanced opportunity that comes with the pay raise. And so I think we have to be really careful when we think motivation is monolithic, that it's just something where there are 1 or 2 or 3 levers I can pull and that's going to motivate everybody the same way, because it's just not true. And the other thing is, most of the research into motivation dating back many, many decades shows us that all of those sort of extrinsic motivators, things we tend to think of as extrinsic motivators, things like pay raises, words of encouragement, promotions, perks, flexibility, things like that, they do have an effect on our motivation in the short term, but that those effects don't last very long. And eventually we revert to the mean, and it takes new infusions of those external motivational forces to keep us motivated. So if you're going to give somebody a pay raise in order to motivate them, you better be prepared to be giving them pay raises pretty frequently if you want to keep them charged up. Or you can learn what it is that uniquely drives them and learn to speak their motivational language and sort of unlock their motivation code. And when you do that, it completely changes the calculus. And by the way, the same for us as individuals. Once we understand why certain moments are deeply gratifying and fulfilling to us, then it really changes the way that we approach our work. We tend to think that, and this kind of gets to the third myth, we tend to think that if I just had the perfect set of tasks, that I would be motivated. So a lot of people jump from job to job or, career to career thinking, well, the reason I'm not motivated is I haven't found the perfect set of tasks yet. The reality is we all have to do tasks we don't like. As I mentioned with my writing, we all have to do tasks that we don't like in order to achieve outcomes that we love. And so once we understand more fully what uniquely motivates us, we can bring our motivation to our work instead of waiting for our work to motivate us. I'll give you an example of how that plays out in my life. One of my top motivational themes, so I already mentioned influence behavior and I mentioned make an impact. My number 2 theme is something called meet the challenge, which means I need imminent, concrete challenges to tackle in my world. And that's what propels me forward when there's a challenge put in front of me. So Melissa, if you came to me and said, Todd, I don't know if this is possible, but I'm already in. I don't care what comes after the but, I'm already in because you've just triggered my meet the challenge motivation. And so for me as a writer, writing 60,000 words or 70,000 words for a manuscript, that doesn't really feel like a challenge to me because it's this big amorphous 2-year process, or 4 years in this case. But what I have to do is I have to say, I am going to write 500 words before 9:30 this morning. That is my challenge. I'm going to do that every single day. I'm going to write 900 or 500 words before 9:30 this morning. And when I do that, I feel great. I feel like I'm making progress. I feel like I'm engaged with the work. I'm engaged with the writing, not because I love to write, but because I'm triggering part of my motivation code that keeps me engaged and makes me feel fulfilled because of the way I'm approaching the work versus waiting for the work itself to motivate me.
Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. When I was going through some of the motivation code, some of the things that were coming to mind is I have historically believed at different times that, sometimes I'm motivated and sometimes I'm not. Like I'll go through a slump of not being motivated. And as I was reading, I started to understand that those slumps, it wasn't just like, oh, well, yeah, once a year I'm not quite as motivated. It's that I lost the motivators from whatever the last project was, or I had already reached those and I needed to find a way to kind of come back or find a new motivator that fell in line with what my top motivators were. And it also kind of reminds me of when I first read Simon Sinek's Start With Why. I remember having an aha moment about just finding a deeper motivation than getting this done. And it's like the why that drives you. But I have to say that when I found that why for that project, it wasn't quite lasting for me. It was at first. And sometimes if I remind myself about it, I get a little bit re-motivated, but it was missing something that was really key for me. And I took your motivation assessment and I almost feel like I shouldn't have this top motivator, but maybe it's that I'm an only child or whatever. But my top motivation theme is to evoke recognition. And my second one is to excel. And then the third one is to demonstrate new learning. And when I saw those, I was like, that is exactly when I am most motivated. I don't know why. I don't know. Should we be kind of embarrassed of some of our motivators? I spend so much time telling people not to do stuff for other people, but evoke recognition is my top motivator.
No. So recognize that every motivation is a gift, first of all. So every motivation has extremely wonderful, positive attributes. I guarantee you, Melissa, that all of the people listening to this show, and I know you have a lot of people who listen to this show, love the fact that you are drawn to the spotlight, that you put yourself out there in a public way and that you exercise your demonstrate new learning motivation to frequently share with them things that you're learning in your world and showing them how to do things that you're discovering for yourself and that you're motivated to excel while you're doing it. So, and I would love to continue to have a conversation if you're willing to go into how these motivations play together, because really you can't think about just your top motivation. You really have to think about how your top 3 to 5 motivations interact with one another, because what we've discovered is that your motivational themes modify one another. These themes of motivation are unique to you, Melissa. So someone else with a number 1 theme of evoke recognition might be motivated or generally energized in a different way if they have a different number two motivation than you do with your number two motivation of excel. And so it's important that we think about these as sort of like clusters of motivations. And that's why we call your motivation code your top 3 to 5 motivations, not just your top motivation. So please don't be embarrassed by that. And please don't wish that it was something else, because frankly, we need people who are driven by evoke recognition. We need people who are out there stepping out into the spotlight, people who are out front who are saying, hey, let me show you the way. It's totally okay that you get charged up by that. I mean, I've been working with people for a long time who are similarly driven, and they're some of the most compassionate, collaborative, generous people I know. But when they really light up, it's when I speak a word of encouragement to them. It's when I say, hey, let me tell you something great that you did. There's nothing wrong with that, that's what really charges you up. That's just the way that you're wired. And it's in some ways, I think, really, really healthy, because we need other people in order to see ourselves fully. And someone who doesn't really care about what other people say to them probably isn't seeing the full picture of who they are. So it's important that we see each of these motivations as a gift, but also, just like anything, there's a positive side of it, but there's also a shadow side. So sometimes people with an evoke recognition motivation can seek recognition and can almost go into a funk when they're not getting recognition for their work, when they don't feel like what they're doing is being seen as valuable in some capacity, or when somebody that they care about passes over them and doesn't give them that recognition for the work that they're doing. Sometimes you can go into a bit of a funk. You can become dependent on the feedback of other people instead of being able to stand on your own, right? And so that's sort of how it plays out in an unhealthy way. But when it's at its healthiest, it actually is incredibly effective at propelling you forward in the work that is in front of you.
I saw that all of our motivations, all of the themes and motivations have a shadow side. Why is it important to identify what the shadow side is and say, I was looking at mine, how do we combat that? Or how do we make sure that that doesn't bring us down or decrease our motivation when we're working?
Yeah, well, I think awareness is absolutely the first step, right? Which is why we spend so much time articulating those shadow sides in the book, The Motivation Code, and why we do that, the same thing in the assessment for your top motivations. Because often things play out in our life. There are patterns that play out over and over. And I see this, I'm sure you see this often as well in the work that you do, that you just see people making the same mistakes over and over, people entering into the same areas of conflict over and over. And it seems like they're just, it's like Groundhog Day, right? It's like, oh, well, it's time for these two people to fight again on our team. What do you know? We're at this point in the project. Well, it could be that, for example, one of the people is driven to bring to completion, which is one of our motivational themes, which means that they want to check things off, get things done, check them off, and move on to the next thing. Maybe the other person is driven to explore, meaning that they like to ask questions. They like new experiences. They're always asking, why are we doing this? And what if we tried this? And have you considered this? And let's look at this thing over here. And, they're always asking questions. Well, of course, there are going to be moments when a person who is primarily getting their energy from bringing to completion has to collaborate with somebody who gets their energy from asking, why are we even doing this, right? There's going to be conflict. And often on teams, we don't understand the source of that conflict is where people are getting their motivational energy. So once we understand one another and we understand each other's motivations, we can say, oh, you know what? Right now, it's like the very early stages of this project. I know that you are driven to bring to completion. I understand that. I know that you're trying to get this done, but now is the time of the project when we need to be asking a lot of questions. We need to make sure that we've centered in on the right thing, that we're asking all of those what if questions, challenging assumptions. There's going to come a time in the project when that bring to completion motivation is going to become really, really valuable to the team. And we need to talk to the explore person and say, hey, love all your questions. Now's not the right time for them. Why don't you go start working on the next project and start getting ahead of us and start asking some questions there, right? Or let's figure out a different place for you to activate that explore motivation. Once we understand where those areas of conflict are arising and why they're arising, we can have a more meaningful and empathetic conversation with one another. I mean, I see this actually in my relationship with my wife because she is driven to make it right. meaning that she wants to get things right. She wants to make sure that she can't let any details sort of fall by the side. She is driven by justice, like anything that feels unjust, she just can't let it go, right? Whereas I am primarily more driven by kind of visionary types of things. So I'll introduce like a bunch of ideas and she'll immediately start asking, well, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do this? How are you, 2 weeks later, she'll be like, what are you doing about that thing you shared? And I don't even remember the idea. It's just one of like 100 ideas I've thrown out, but she's trying to optimize it and trying to make it what it needs to be. Well, we figured that out about ourselves. And so now I can say, hey, I'm just throwing a bunch of stuff out here that I'm probably never going to execute. But what do you think about this? Right? And that doesn't create in her the sense of pressure or the need to try to optimize those ideas. Instead, it's just, okay, this is just Todd sort of activating his motivational energy right now.
That's so interesting because when I was going through your assessment, there were certain questions that I'm like, does this actually really motivate people? And it was like the doing it right or like by the book. And I'm just so opposite of that. I'm like, this is how everyone else says to do it. I wonder if I can find a different, better way.
Isn't it funny? Because it's so funny how often I can't imagine, as somebody who is a card-carrying introvert, I can't imagine someone whose number one motivation is collaborate. But there are tons of people out there who they don't care what they're doing. They don't care what the work is. They don't care what their role is. They don't care about any of that. They just want to be on a high functioning team because they love working with other people. That's what drives them. All of their peak moments in their life. And we have people describe things like, I was the 11th man on my high school basketball team and we won a really important game. And I never played, but it was just so great being a part of a team that won an important game. And I'm like, what do you mean you never played? What are you talking about? How was that challenging, right? How were you overcoming something? What kind of impact did you have? Like, as I look at it through the lens of my motivations, it doesn't make sense. But to them, it's like, this was a really deeply gratifying moment for me. So again, we increase empathy when we can have a meaningful conversation about where we get our energy. And all of a sudden, it opens up new worlds of exploring relationship and work and engagement and satisfaction and all of these things that were previously hidden just beneath the surface of our lives.
So for the listeners that are out there that are thinking, well, I think I know my motivations, but I'm not really sure. I definitely didn't know it was this complex. What are the first steps to start to uncover their motivation themes? You know what's crazy? After all these years of hosting Mind Love and talking to some of the world's leading experts, one of the biggest eye-openers for me has been just how much our gut affects, well, everything. When my gut feels good, my mind feels clearer, my intuition is stronger, and I just feel more balanced. And that's why I'm excited about Zoe, a science-backed nutrition company that is totally changing how we understand our gut health. They've created the most scientifically advanced at-home gut test and built the world's largest microbiome database. So when you get your results, you're not getting generic advice. You're getting insights about your body that other companies just don't have the data to provide. There's also just so much misleading health information out there. Food companies even pay influencers to promote ultra-processed foods as healthy. And that's why I love that Zoe relies purely on science. Real science. The randomized controlled trial showed that participants were 4 times as likely to report better sleep and more energy, all thanks to the info from the largest microbiome database on the planet. So go to Zoe.com and find out what Zoe membership could do for you. And because you listen to Mind Love, you can use the exclusive code MINDLOVE10 to get 10% off membership. As a Zoe member, you'll get an at-home test kit and personalized nutrition program to help you make smarter food choices that support your gut. That's Zoe.com. Use MindLove10 at checkout. Trust your gut. Trust Zoe. What are the first steps to start to uncover their motivation themes?
So the first thing would be probably to pick up a copy of the Motivation Code, the book, because in the book, we talk about all of the families and all of the themes. There are 27 themes that live within 6 families. Again, this is based on over 50 years of research, over 1 million achievement stories, over 100,000 interviews, over the course of obviously many, many decades that have been distilled into these 27 themes by my colleagues and I. Entire teams of PhDs, researchers over the course of many years have pulled this together. So this is by no means my effort. I'm kind of coming in at the very end of all of this. But the motivation code walks through all of those themes and offers some really practical advice. But if you want to take the assessment, there's a free version of the assessment at motivationcode.com/free that gives you your top 3 motivations. And we'll kind of just share with you what those motivations are. And then the book sort of serves as a companion to that assessment to help you do a deeper dive into what those motivations mean. And then there's obviously also a more in-depth sort of upgraded report that you can, or upgraded assessment that you can take as well. That'll give you a lot more detail, including a full ranking of all 27 of your motivational themes and all the details about those themes as well.
When I was going through the assessment, what I liked about it is that the first question it asked was to really identify an achievement story. And it had me do this a few different times. That way, one wasn't the outlier, and then had a bunch of questions after that. But why is it important to identify a story to ask the questions based off of rather than just kind of more generalized?
So glad you asked that question, because very few people ask the question. It's so critical to this whole process. MCODE is, as far as we know, the only story-driven psychometric assessment on the market. And the reason story-driven is so important is because we begin with moments in your life that you describe as deeply gratifying. Rather than asking you to think in broad generalities, we challenge you to come up with a specific instance in which you felt engaged, that you were proud of, something that happened in your life where you felt alive maybe in a way that you hadn't felt alive before. So when we're asking questions of you, you're not thinking in broad generalities like, well, I want to be this kind of person and I want to be that kind of person, right? Instead, you're thinking about a specific instance in your life. And we all have these moments that live forever in our memory, these moments when we come alive, these moments when we accomplish something great. But we very rarely step back to consider what are the patterns within those moments. If we were to connect dots between this experience and that experience, what are the commonalities? And so what we have designed is an assessment that helps you articulate a couple of those stories. And then to consider, we ask several questions, all of which, and by the way, there's an entire tech report that's been compiled around this assessment to prove its validity and all kinds of things. So you can learn more about that at motivationcode.com as well. But what we do basically is ask a bunch of questions to help you identify the patterns between those stories. And so if we had just sent you, Melissa, through it, you probably would not have, without the stories specifically, you probably would not have come up with evoke recognition as your top theme. You probably would have come up with whatever you wanted your top theme to be, right? But by forcing you to think very specifically about instances in your life and consider those moments, suddenly now you're not just inventing a narrative that you want. Instead, you're extrapolating from some concrete, discrete instance in your life, and it makes it far, far more accurate. And you can begin to look at the patterns between each of those stories and consider how your motivations were at play.
Yeah, it reminds me of whenever I have those assessments on figure out your values. It's funny because a lot of times people give you a whole list of like 100 and something values. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, it almost feels weird not to circle some of these. Like, I don't want to skip over honesty, you know what I mean? But like, but it's like, but is that what's really driving me? And I ended up finding an assessment. I think the first time I ever saw something that I use now, I adapted it a little bit, but it was from Mastin Kipp's Claim Your Power. And he had us, or the readers, write down 3 or 5 something of our happiest moments when we were most lit up. And then all of the emotions that we felt during that happiest moment, and then try to find the themes from that. And that was just so eye-opening to me because, again, like, I think we have so much in our minds about what we're supposed to be or what the ideal person is. That's really how our society runs, you know? And so instead to take something that's already happened and analyze that, like what already lit me up, not what do I want to light me up? And the same kind of goes for this motivation code.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I think that, there are all kinds of narratives about who we should be, what we should be. And we live with many delusions, many assumptions about the kind of person we need to be in order to do X, Y, and Z. There's a guy named Richard Heitner who was global vice chair of Saatchi & Saatchi at the time I interviewed him. And he wrote a great book about being the number 2 in charge. It was called Consigliere was the name of the book. And it was phenomenal. And he said he spent most of his life thinking, if you want to be successful, you have to be the CEO, not the COO. You have to want to be in the spotlight. You have to be the person in charge. You have to be the person at the head of the pack leading the way. And he said the problem was I tried that and it wasn't how I was gifted. I'm a great COO, but not a great CEO. I'm a great second in command, driving alignment and really helping organize and implement the leader's vision, but I'm not the person to be that person out front leading the charge. But so much of my life and my career and so many organizations are centered around, this narrative. If you don't want to be CEO, there's something wrong with you. And so I think what happens when we start thinking about our lives in a very specific way, through stories of achievement, stories of accomplishment, is we can be a little more honest because we're getting at our motivations sort of through a back door in a way, instead of layering these societal expectations upon ourselves that we all carry around, whether it's from a teacher or parents or just society at large. Instead, we can just think in a very specific and concrete way about these moments that gratified us. And it doesn't matter what we answer because, in a way, because nobody is going to be judging our answers. And that just gives us a much more accurate view of who we really are and what it is that really drives us.
Can you give us an example of one of the stories that you used when you were uncovering your motivations and how it kind of spoke to what your motivation themes are? Because I find that people seem to really remember things a lot better when they have a story to go with it.
Yeah. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I caught a freak infection in my back. I was like in a basketball game as a sophomore, and my coach pulled me from the game because I had some tightness in my back and couldn't figure out what was going on. So he sent me back into the game. I couldn't play, so he pulled me out and I tried to stretch. It didn't work. That night, I woke up in the middle of the night and I couldn't move my legs. So I rolled out of bed. I crawled to my parents' room and I sort of screamed help, and they called an ambulance. They sent me to the hospital. They couldn't figure out what was going on. They did an X-ray and they found a giant grapefruit-sized mass in my abdomen. And at first they thought it was a cancerous tumor. After a little bit of exploratory surgery, they realized it was a swollen muscle. I had such a deep infection in my body and such a quantity of infection in my body that it had swollen the muscle and it was pressing my sciatic nerve against my sacroiliac joint, basically rendering me unable to move my legs. So extremely dangerous situation. They transferred me to the hospital in the nearest, big city that was close to us, and put me on this unbelievable course of antibiotics. And my parents, to this day, they still say, I remember the doctor came in. The doctor's name was Dr. Michael Brady, which is funny because of the Brady Bunch. Michael Brady. A lot of people probably have no idea what I'm talking about when I say the Brady Bunch. As a child of the 70s and 80s, that was a big thing for me. Anyway, he came to my parents and he said, if I can save him. And my parents were like, what do you mean if? But he was like, I'm going to have to pump him full of so much antibiotics that it could potentially change his life forever. We don't know what it's going to do. And I was told I probably would walk the same way again. I probably wouldn't play basketball again, which is my real love at the time. I lost 53 pounds in the hospital. I came out at 6'3", 131 pounds. So I was like completely skin and bones, had no muscle mass, and was on a long road to recovery. I did recover. I spent months and months and months learning how to walk incredibly painfully. I put back on my muscle mass. Lots of people came around and helped me out. And I actually ended up playing basketball my junior year and then playing my senior year and had some success my senior year. The reason that story is important to me has nothing to do with the fact that I was successful my senior year. I got to play in some really cool games and was recognized and all kinds of stuff as a result of my success. It had nothing to do with that. The reason that story is meaningful to me is because of one of my motivational themes, which is overcome, which is my number 4 theme, actually. I do best when the odds are stacked against me. I do best when I'm the underdog taking on Goliath. I do best when I know that there's some fight ahead of me. That animates me. It triggers me. It motivates me. And so to this day, in my home office here, I have a cutout that my father was able to obtain a couple of years ago. It's the top of the key, like the very top of the circle on the basketball court in my high school gym. They tore it down a couple of years ago, and he was able to get a little 2-foot by 2-foot square of the basketball floor. And it's here. It's in my home office. And the reason it's here is to remind me that there's always a path through, and to remind me of that overcome motivation, that is really at the heart of it, what drives and animates some of those key moments in my life. is when I feel like the odds are stacked against me. Had they not come to me and said, we don't think you're going to play basketball again, or we don't think you're going to walk in the same way again, if they had just been super encouraging and had, said whatever, I don't think I would have approached my recovery with the same gusto and may not have had the same outcome. But because of that, I pushed myself to excel. I pushed myself to come back in a stronger fashion. And so it's just a reminder to me that overcome motivation is so strong in me. But there's also a shadow side to that, which is sometimes I look for obstacles to overcome where they don't exist, or I look for enemies where they don't exist, or I look for opposition. I always want to fight against something instead of fighting for something. So that's part of the shadow side of that motivation. But it's just a reminder to me that I do best when I'm in those seemingly impossible situations.
How do you combat that shadow side in that one in particular? Like, you're aware of it, but what do you do? Do you just notice when it's popping up, or do you have certain practices to make sure that you're not doing that?
So whenever I'm compelled to act, I always ask, why am I doing this? Like if somebody, I could, here's a great example. I mentioned that one of my top motivations is influence behavior, which means I need to see people nodding along with me. I need to see them engaged or laughing at my jokes, which again, as somebody who speaks in front of thousands of people routinely in non-COVID times, right? When I'm on stage in front of thousands of people at a time, I love it when people are nodding along and smiling and laughing and engaged. But I will say, if there's one person sitting in the front row with their arms crossed with a scowl on their face, that will ruin the entire thing for me. I could have 1,999 people laughing and smiling and having a great time with my talk. And if one person is scowling at me, I'll walk away thinking, that was terrible. I don't know why I didn't reach people today. I don't know why people weren't engaged. So I have to recognize what's going on in that moment. I'm actually having the impact I want. It's just that one person, for whatever reason, isn't engaged with what I'm doing. Or maybe they are. Maybe they just have a sour looking face, right, all the time. I don't know. But I have to keep that in mind before I act, because my instinct in that moment, Melissa, is I'm going to tailor the entire talk around trying to get that person to respond to me and ignore the other 1,999 people in the room, which would be a terrible idea, of course, right? So when I am in those moments, I have trained myself to step back and to ask, okay, what's going on right now? Okay, this is my influence behavior motivation on steroids, trying to accomplish something that's part of my shadow side, which is I have to see people respond at all costs, no matter what, right? And I need to step back and say, okay, what am I really trying to do right now? What outcome am I really trying to achieve right now? And it just really helps me. The same with overcome. If somebody sends me an email, I could get 1,000 emails complimentary of what I do. But if somebody sends me an email that's critical, I want to chase it down to the end of the earth, because that's my overcome, right? Like I want to chase it down. I want to make the argument. I want to make sure that they see things my way. I want to make sure I influence their behavior and I overcome in this circumstance. So I just recognize like that. I could do that, but that's a misuse of that motivational energy, because what is the ultimate outcome going to be anyway of that? And it just helps me understand why I'm driven in certain ways to do certain things that could be unproductive in terms of the objectives I'm trying to accomplish.
So my third motivation is demonstrate new learnings. And you use the example of, some people might end up jumping from job to job as a shadow side of this. And I'm just reminded when I was younger, that was definitely a problem that I had. I got a job as an enrollment counselor for University of Phoenix, which now I'm like, that was kind of a spammy school. But at the time I believed in it. And when I joined, I was just, well, first of all, you were supposed to already have a degree to be working there. I didn't yet. So I was all excited about that. I was like the youngest person coming in. So I was getting the recognition that was feeding my number one. But then I basically worked hard, got the most sales in my little district area because it's a sales job. And I felt awesome about it. I got a promotion and everything. And then it just lost its luster because it wasn't new and exciting anymore. It was just doing the same thing over and over again. So I'm curious, because I do know a lot of people have that habit of jumping from job to job. Things kind of lose their luster. It's not that new and exciting feeling. What would be an example of finding a way to overcome that shadow side of the motivation?
So one of the mistakes we make is we think that our job has to encapsulate all of our effort, all of our energy. It has to be the thing where we pour all of our motivation. If you're in a role that doesn't really honor that demonstrate new learning motivation at any given point, it's important that you have some area of your life where you're activating that motivation consistently. So, starting a podcast is a great example of that, right? I don't know if you were working elsewhere when you started the podcast, but if so, that was probably a great move, because no matter what's going on in your job, you have a place where you can go and you can exercise that motivation. Really, the main thing about our motivations is that we need to pay attention to having areas of our life where we're able to activate those motivations consistently. And ideally, we'll be in a job where we can do that, where we can seek maybe more flexibility to do things. Like, for example, you can approach your manager and say, hey, I would love to just do some research on behalf of the organization and share those once a month with the team. Things I'm finding out, or things that are inspiring me, or things that are going on in our industry. Share some trends with the group or something like that. Would it be possible for me at our monthly meeting or whenever it is to just share 10 minutes of trends or 10 minutes of things that I'm learning or seeing? Those are the kinds of opportunities you can pursue to ensure that you have some place where you're exercising this motivation consistently in your work. But if it can't be fit into your work for some reason, then having something outside of work can be equally effective.
That actually reminds me, my last job, I did have a job at the time that I started the podcast, and I was completely burnt out from the job. I was working with someone that our personalities clashed, and it was pretty challenging. And so looking back in hindsight, I think you would have been proud of me. I was basically at a point where I'm like, I need to quit, but I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. I wanted to start something of my own. So I started Mind Love on the side to have something that kind of lit me up. And I went through all these different practices of like figuring out what that thing would be. And one of the things I realized in doing all those purpose finding activities was that I wanted to find something I was endlessly curious about. So I guess that would be demonstrate new learning. And I came across the idea of this podcast because I'm like, I'm always reading books about the mind, mindfulness, just how much power we have that we don't know we have. So I chose this idea. I did it on the side. I was super motivated by it. But at the same time, in my job, I remember then, now that I had this thing on the side, my whole life wasn't wrapped up in my job anymore. And so I was able to kind of see it from a new lens. And what I did was I was like, well, you know what? What opportunities does this job provide that maybe going on into entrepreneurship doesn't quite yet? And one of those things was, so I was kind of trying to segue into this new entrepreneur path. And I'm like, well, in this job, I have the opportunity to do Facebook ads. I have the opportunity to already have an audience that I can test different techniques on. And then I can learn about this and eventually apply it to my entrepreneur path. And so I can see how I was almost uncovering these motivation themes on my own and then segueing into a new path once I really developed the confidence of doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were very wise to do that. I think it probably had something to do with that Excel motivation, right? That you're motivated to get out there and figure out a way to excel in what you were doing. But we never make progress by wallowing. We never make progress by lamenting our situation. We're all going to find ourselves from time to time in places where we don't want to be. And our choice is, what am I going to do about it? How am I going to respond to the circumstance in front of me? How am I going to bring myself more fully and completely to what I'm doing instead of waiting for the circumstances around me to change? And the more proactive we are about that, and frankly, the more knowledge we have about ourselves and what drives us, what motivates us, the more proactive we can be about that, because we'll understand which levers to pull in order to trigger engagement in our life.
So if we are forming a team, for those people out there that do have a team at their job or they're an entrepreneur that are hiring people, do you think that it's important to find people with different motivators, with similar motivators, or does it not really matter?
Yeah, it is. Diversity is really important on so many levels in any organization, but diversity of motivation is important as well, because As I mentioned, if you have 5 people driven to bring to completion on your team and like maybe one other person driven to collaborate or driven to serve, like you're going to get a lot of stuff done, but are you getting the right things done? Are you asking the right questions? Are you creating work that is as good as it could be? Or are you just creating work and then moving on? So the first step is just to identify, where is everybody on my team right now? I mean, one of the things we're finding is that people are using M-code in the hiring process just to understand what triggers the people on their team, right? Like, what is it that really drives them? And even using it in a team context to understand better some of the team dynamics and how they can uniquely motivate the people on the team. So if it came down to it and you were on my team and I wanted to in some way, motivate you, or I was approaching you about a new project or something like that, I'm probably going to find a way to incorporate your demonstrate new learning motivation into my ask of you. I'm going to find a way to do that because I know that's something that's going to cause you to feel engaged with the work. So how can I in some way incorporate Melissa's demonstrate new learning motivation? Or frankly, if I want to make sure that you feel motivated after a project, I am going to pull you up in front of the entire team and I'm going to talk about how amazing of a job that you did on this project. I'm going to call you out.
So good.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But see, for other people, though, that's not it at all. That wouldn't be it at all. For me, if my boss came to me and said, you really changed my mind on this. I didn't think this was going to work and you completely changed my mind. And now I'm 100% a believer in this approach that you took. I'm walking on clouds for days. I don't care if I'm called out in front of the team or for me, it's about making sure that I've influenced someone's behavior, right? Or making sure that there's been an impact for my work in some way. So, once you understand that, you can learn to speak to and motivate people according to what it is that really drives them instead of guessing.
Well, thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. I feel ultra motivated after having done this assessment. And so I'll link to your free assessment in the show notes as well for easy access for people. And where else, if people want to learn more about this, can they connect with you online?
Yeah, they can go to motivationcode.com. That's the site where everything lives surrounding Motivation Code. Of course, you can also go to my personal site, which is toddhenry.com. And that's where all my other books and my podcasts I've been doing since 2005 and everything else live as well.
All of the links from this episode will be at mindlove.com/157. And I will also link to the free Motivation Code assessment, which will be your challenge for this week. It's actually really fun to take. You're going to pick some stories from your life so that it's grounded in real life examples instead of just the person that you think you are or that you wish that you were. It's the person that you already are. What's already been motivating you? What are the patterns that you haven't yet seen? So it'll ask you a few of those and questions to go along with it, and then let you know your 3 top motivators. When you figure these out, I encourage you to look back at more examples in your life and see how these may have played a part. And then the fun part, figure out where you're feeling unmotivated and see if you can somehow stimulate some of those key motivational factors into your life right now, into the structure of your day, into the way you're structuring your goals, and see if it brings a different outcome. So for me, as ridiculous as I kind of think that it is, one of my unique motivators is evoking recognition. And since I discovered this, I've been doing 2 different things. First of all, I've been working with my shadow side of that, making sure that I'm doing things for the right reasons, making sure that I don't need other people to be cheering me on in order to get stuff done that's important to me. At the same time, I have been sharing my wins more often. That's something that I did really often when I was starting Mind Love. When I'd hit a new benchmark or got featured somewhere, I would share it on Facebook. And this wasn't necessarily a way to brag. It served a number of purposes for me. First of all, I was able to stimulate one of my key motivators. Second of all, the way I thought of it back then and the way I still think of it now is that it was a little bit of accountability for me. Celebrating your wins in general has been proven to motivate a lot of people. Whenever you evoke those feelings or those emotions inside yourself, that's what helps you keep coming back to all the hard things. So celebrating it with other people also felt really powerful for me, especially because a lot of them knew what I had gone through in my life. And if you're having a hard time getting around the fact that, hey, I don't want to feel like I'm bragging, I don't want to feel like I'm trying to bring attention onto myself, consider this. When you shine, you give other people permission to shine. I cannot tell you how many people reached out to me when I was sharing my wins that first year, telling me how much I inspired them, asking for advice about starting their own things. It gives people permission to show up for themselves in a big way, especially as women. It's proven that men brag more than women. Women have a hard time bragging, and I know a lot of different women's groups that have been trying to break that stigma and encourage women to brag more often. So that's part of the challenge for you. Celebrate yourself a little bit and invite people in to celebrate with you. But if that's not your motivation code, figure out what is and see how you can feed it a little bit more as you are accomplishing your goals. This is a really fun exercise that at first can be difficult because you're not used to thinking in that way. But once you get the hang of it, you automatically start to structure different goals and milestones around what's going to really work for you instead of doing 10x the work in a way that doesn't work for you. So let me know how it goes. I would love to hear what your motivations are and also how you plan to work with them in the future. So do reach out to me on Instagram. This is one of those things that really fascinates me. So if you've been waiting for a reason to reach out, this is it. I want to know what these motivations are. I want to know some of the unique ways that you've figured out how to work with them because it's going to give me ideas on how to use them in my life as well. So reach out to me at mindlovemelissa. I apologize, my voice is kind of scratchy today. I think it's because I'm really tired. I don't even know why, but every time I'm tired, my voice gets a little bit coarse. My little raspy voice often gets coarse, so thanks for bearing with me. And if this episode was helpful for you, please share it with a friend or a coworker. Take a screenshot, tag Mind Love Melissa and Mind Love Podcast. We have some really amazing premium episodes this month. So if you haven't signed up for premium, get in now. Go to mindlove.com/premium. You get twice the episodes plus meditations, and I would love to see you there. If you love Mind Love, please consider leaving a 5-star review in Apple Podcasts. It's super helpful to me. I've been seeing those pouring in lately, and maybe it's that evoke recognition thing, but also it really does help the algorithm and it helps grow the show and entices even more amazing, powerful guests. So please leave that review, and otherwise, thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.